Hello everyone and welcome to this lesson. In this lesson we'll be discussing layouts, specifically base layouts, authentication and authorization layouts, and custom 404 pages. So as you can see, I've already generated a new Angular application and I've already copied over the two images from the course's GitHub repository. We have the logo image and then we also have the not found image. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to go ahead and generate 4 new components, and those components are going to be the auth layout component, a base layout component, a not found component, and then a home component. Okay, with those 4 components created, I'm going to go ahead and close down the terminal window. We'll expand these components. So we should have an auth layout component, a base layout component, a home component, and then a not found component. So the next thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and open up the app module.ts file, and we're going to import over some components that we're going to use to set the foundation for our application that we're creating. So we're going to need to import over the mat toolbar module, the flex layout module, the mat card module, the mat button module. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. And as you remember from previous exercises, whatever we import over, we need to add to our imports array. So I'm going to go ahead and add that now. Okay, with those items imported over, let's go ahead and open up our routing file, and we'll go ahead and create routes for our components in our application. So we're going to open up the app-routing.module.ts file. We're going to need to import over those components that we just created. So we'll import over the base layout component, the home component, the auth layout component, and the not found component. Okay, with those imported over, let's go ahead and add them to our routes array. So we're going to have basically 2 parent routes, and then we're going to have nested routes underneath that, and then we're also going to create a redirect so that when a user enters an invalid URL, we're going to redirect them to the not found. So I'm going to go ahead and create that one right now. So we'll say path, and then we'll have an open and closing quote, and then we'll have 2 stars. And then underneath that, we're going to say redirect to, and then we want to say session, and then we're going to say not found. Inside the first route, we're going to say path, and then we're just going to have an open and closing quote. We're going to call it a component, and then we're going to say base layout component. And then underneath it, we're going to say children, and then we're going to have an array of child routes. So I'm going to create an open and closing curly brace, then I'm going to give it a path, and we'll have an open and closing quote, and then we're going to say component, home component. So basically what we are trying to do is we're trying to say that anyone that follows the base layout component, they're going to be using the base layout and all of the child components of that base component. So the next layout we're going to have is going to be for session. So I'm going to say path, and then we're going to say session. We'll give this one a component of auth layout. We're going to say children, and the children is going to be an array of child routes. And so for this exercise, we're just going to have one route, and that's going to be called not found. And then we're going to give it a component of not found component. And so if you remember, down below, we had this entry that said redirect, and it said session/not found. Well, that makes sense now when you see we added the second route that says path session, and then it also has a child path of not found. So if you can see, we have session is going to be the parent route, so it's going to use the auth layout component, and then we're going to navigate them to the not found component, because that's why we have that second slash. So we can go ahead and save that. Let's go and open up our app.component.ts file. We're going to want to add a new variable for our assignments. So we're going to say assignment, and then we're just going to say GPA calculator for the name of our assignment. And then we can call it part 1, and then we'll go ahead and remove the previous title that we had. So then let's open up our app.component.html file. We want to remove the pre-generated code. And all we really want is just one router outlet. Okay, with that in place, we can go ahead and open up our base layout component and start building our base layout for our application. So I'm going to close all these tabs out again. We're going to find the base layout component. We're going to open up the HTML file. We're going to remove the pre-generated code. And what we want to do is we want to create a toolbar header, and then we also want to have a main body. So I'm just going to use the matte toolbar for the header. We'll give it a color of primary. I'm going to have a matte toolbar row. Now inside this matte toolbar row, we're going to actually be calling our logo for the logo of our application with a height of 80. Now if you don't have the images, remember you go to the courses GitHub repository and you can find the images there. So inside this row, I'm going to have a div class. This class is going to be called logo. And then inside that div class, I want to have the actual image that I'm referencing. So I'm going to say image source, and this is going to be pointing to our assets directory, and then the name of the image. Now, if you remember, I like to just right click it, say rename, and then once I say rename, I just don't actually rename it, but I copy the name of the image that I want to move over, just so that I make sure that the spelling and the punctuation, everything matches exactly how the image has been specified. So I'll just paste that there. We're going to give it a height, and the height is going to be 80. Underneath that, we're going to have another div, and this one's going to be a width of 80%. So we're going to say style, and then we'll give it a width of 80%. And then we're going to say div. Underneath it, we'll have another div, and that div is actually going to be pushed all the way to the right-hand side. So we're going to say div fx layout. We're going to say row wrap. and then FX layout align, and we're going to say end, and then start. Inside this body, we're going to have a button. That button's going to be a Matte button, and it's going to route users back to the home. So we're going to say Matte button, and then router link, and then we're going to route them link back to the home, and that's going to be our home component. Underneath our toolbar, we're going to add a new line, so we'll add a break statement, and then we're going to have another div that's going to be FX layout. This is going to be a row. We're going to use wrap, and then we're going to say div FX flex, and then we're going to have a Matte card, and we'll say this one's going to be a main container as the class. We'll create the class in just a second, and then inside that we're going to have our title and a content. So we're going to say Matte card title. This is going to be for our assignment variable that we created. And then we're going to have two breaks. And then we're going to have Matte card content. And inside the Matte card content, we're going to have a router outlet. And then just make sure you hit save. And so the next thing we want to do now is we want to go ahead and move over to our base layout.component.ts file, and we actually want to implement some code for that assignment variable so that, because you'll see right now there's a red squiggly line underneath the assignment. That's because we haven't defined the variable. So what we're going to want to do is we want to hop over to the component file and then assign that variable. So I'll go ahead and open up the component, the base layout.component.ts file. We're going to create a new assignment variable. So we're going to say assignment. We'll give it a string value. And then inside the constructor, we're going to go ahead and say this.assignment equals, and then we're going to say exercise 6.3, and we're going to say layouts. Now, we did create inside the app.component.ts file, we actually created this assignment variable here. We don't technically need it, so we can go ahead and just remove this. Okay, so now that we have our assignment variable created, if we go back over to our HTML file, base layout.component HTML file, that assignment squiggly line should be removed from the error on our page. So then we'll go ahead and open up our base layout.component.css file, and we'll actually create the main container class so that we have that styling for it, and then our logo class as well too. So we'll go ahead and open up the CSS file. We're going to create a class called logo. Inside that body, we're going to say margin top, and then we're just going to say 5 pixels. The next one is going to be the main container. This one's going to have padding top 25 pixels. We're going to give it a width of 80%, and then we're going to say margin 0 auto so that we can center this div in the middle of the screen. So I'm going to say padding top 25 pixels. We're going to say width 80%. And then we're going to say margin 0 auto. Okay, with that saved, let's go ahead and open up our not found component, and we'll create the styling for our not found page. So we can go ahead and remove the pre-generated code that came once we generate our application. And so we want to create a div, and this one's going to be an FX layout of column. And then this one's actually going to be a Matte card. So we'll give it an FX flex. We're going to say style, and we're just going to do some inline CSS styling for this. So we're going to say margin top. And this is going to be 10%. We're going to give it a width of 50%. We're going to say margin left, and then we'll say this is going to be 18%. And then we're going to give it a class of matte elevation, and we're going to say 0. Hopefully everyone remembers for a Matte card, you have a Matte card title, and then you have a Matte card content. So I'll go ahead and create those now, just so that we don't forget to add both a title and content. So for the title, we actually want to just call the image, and that's going to be our not found image. So I'm just going to say image. And the source is going to be the assets. And then it's going to be the not found image. And again, if I just right click the image and select rename, we're not actually renaming it, but we're just going to copy the name so we make sure we have the spelling correctly. And then for the content, we're going to go ahead and create a button. And this button is going to allow our users to re-navigate back to the home screen if they reach this page incorrectly. So before they do that, let's go ahead and add some inline CSS styling for this. So we'll say style, and we're going to say text align center. And then we're going to give it a padding left of 30%. For the button, we're going to say a matte raised button. We'll give it a color of accent. And then for the router link, we're just going to navigate them back to the home component, which is just going to be that /. And then for a title, we're just going to say return home. Okay, let's go ahead and save it. Then we're going to open up a new terminal window, and we're just going to run the application and open up a browser to verify everything we did is working correctly, and we're able to see the base layout and navigate to the home component as well as see the not found component. So I'm just going to say ng serve. All right, looks like there was no errors from the build, so let's go and open up a browser window. And then we just want to navigate to localhost 4200. And if everything was working correctly, you're going to see the logo on the left-hand screen, and then you're going to see one link that says home. And then you'll just see a output that says homeworks. So if you remember, we had that other component called not found. So I'll open up the routing file just so that you can see it again. In the app-routing.module.ts file, we had the second route that was called session. And underneath the session, it had this children route that was called not found. And then underneath it, we had this redirect to session not found if there's 2 asterisks entered into the path. And so what that basically means is if there's a URL that doesn't match any routing in our routing file, then we're going to redirect them to the session not found component. So let's go ahead and test that out and make sure that's working correctly. So on the top of the screen, I'm just going to go after the 4200, I'm going to say / and then we'll just do ASDF. And I'm going to click enter. And if everything is working correctly, you're going to see where it says auth layout works. But actually, we're supposed to see that layout that we created, right? So that image that I had, there should be displaying here so we can actually see that the session route works. So let's go back over to our session component. If we open up our auth layout.html file, and you can see that we have this P tag that says auth layout works. Well, if we go back over to the browser, you're going to notice it says auth layout works. What we actually want to show is we actually want to show the not found component. So what we need to do is we need to actually add a router outlet to the auth layout component. So let's go and open it back up. We'll remove this, and then we're just going to add another router outlet, and then we're going to save it. So now let's go back over to that browser. We'll wait till it reloads. And you can see the error message. So the point of that was just to demonstrate that if you don't add the router outlet, then anything underneath it, it's not going to inherit from the base layout. So as you can see, we have our image, and we also have a return home. So if I click on the return home, it takes me back to the home screen. So again, if I go back to the URL, I type in /ASDF, and I click enter, it's going to take me to the not found component. Now that makes sense, right? Because in our auth layout.component.html file, we added that router outlet. Now that we have the router outlet in place, if you open up the router module, any children components that we add are actually going to be displayed in the auth layout component. So if I wanted to add, let's say for example, I wanted to add an h1 tag. And I'm just going to say, I am in the auth layout component. We'll save it. And then let's go over to the browser. refresh our screen, and you're going to see at the top, I have this message that says I'm in the auth layout component. So the goal of this exercise is to demonstrate how to create layouts that other components can inherit as children components. This is a very typical operation or behavior that you'll have in your application when you're building large scale applications. So in other words, if you have multiple different sections in your application where you can have things like administrative duties, or you can have logging into a website, or maybe a marketing site, as well as like personalized information for accounts, and maybe you have different roles, you're going to have various layouts that you want each of those child components to inherit. By using the router outlet and using the children's array of that route, so again, in that app-routing.module.ts file, when you add this prefix that says children, anything that is underneath this is going to inherit all of the styling from that base component that you've created. To recap, in this lesson we covered base layout pages, authentication and authorization layouts, custom 404 pages. In our next lesson we'll discuss input properties, change detections, and bidirectional component communications. Thank you for watching.